Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickett. On this episode, we'll be discussing the effort to recall 3 of the members of the Board of Selectmen. And on the panel today, I have one of the members of the Selectmen, Michael Sullivan, and 2 members of the committee to organize the recall, Christine Howe and Michael Horan. And just to fill the audience in, the 3 selectmen that are there are petitions out to recall: Chairman David Sousa, Vice Chairman Robert Cohn, and Member Peter Brown. And the way the recall this process works, at least the start of it, is that affidavits, separate ones, needed to be filed at the town clerk's office, and former school committee chair Deborah Sovany filed affidavits for Mr. Sousa, Cohn, and Brown, and did so on July 31st. And that gives 20 days until August 21st to collect signatures from 5% of the registered voters in Stoughton, and that's roughly 900 signatures. And so we're here to discuss those efforts and just to take stock of where things stand right now. It's certainly been an eventful month in the town of Stoughton when it comes to the Board of Selectmen and issues in the town manager's office. So let's just start off with, where are you right now with signatures? Because obviously the recall can't go forward unless you get the 900 signatures by the date of August 21st.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for having us today on the show. So as of today, we have roughly over half of the signatures we will need to recall the selectmen. And I will say that there's been a large effort, concerted effort by those involved initially in the decision to recall and submit the affidavits, as well as those around town supporting this. So, the effort's moving, it's very strong, and we have, as I mentioned, just about over half of the signatures we need for recall.
When you file an affidavit, you have to give reasons why the recall is necessary. So I just was hoping that for you to present your case as to why a recall was needed in this case and why you're seeking this.
So as you know, 3 affidavits were filed, one for each member that we're seeking to recall, Mr. Sousa, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Cohn. And on each affidavit, there were 4 reasons listed, 5 for Mr. Sousa. And the primary reasons is their failure to evaluate the sitting town manager and their appointment of an interim, initially the town accountant, and then later Mr. Nastis, and the lack of transparency and openness in that process. An additional reason was the blocking of public comment at the meetings in which they were discussing the appointment of the interim. And in addition, the opening of the town up to liability and the lawsuit that the previous town manager has filed. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think it's also been disconcerting in terms of what's been going on just over the last month or 2. Not only do we have these specific charges of malfeasance, nonfeasance, derogation, et cetera, but the overall attitude exemplified by Mr. Sousa as chair and by several of the other select board meeting members has been really off-putting, and it really suggests that there's a vacuum of leadership here. I think you mentioned the other night in your interview, you asked Mr. Sousa about how do you as chair bring things together. Obviously, a chair, like anybody else, has their own interests, has their own positions, and they're certainly entitled to them. But we also expect them to act so as to try to bridge the gap. And what we've seen since then has only been a widening of the gap, and a creation of more debate, more argument, and frankly, insulting many members of the community. So it goes beyond simply their legal obligations, et cetera, and to what I would call, again, a vacuum of leadership there. And at a point where we really need we really need people to, even as we disagree quite vehemently sometimes, to try to bring us together. And I think in his role of chair, Mr. Sousa, to date, has been defunct in that.
Well, I guess to bring the conversation back a few months, what has changed, I suppose, since the April election? Because the town, I guess you could say, one argument you can make is the town residents have already spoken, and they chose to re-elect David Sousa for 3 more years. And back in December, the board by a 3-2 vote chose to not renew the town manager's contract. So this was going to come to a head at some point, and by July 1st, that's when his contract expired. So that issue wasn't going to go away. And I guess just what changed between the time of the election and now that a recall was necessary, because voters have already weighed in, and they could have chosen a 3-2 board in the other direction if Rick Hill, for example, had been elected. So what's changed?
Jeff, I'm glad you bring that up, and I wanted to come on the program today just to sort of be available to your questions about some of the actions that have gone on, the past month and a half. For me personally, I'm supporting this recall because of some of the actions that have happened in the past month and a half. We've seen the majority members of the board knowingly walk this town into what potentially could be an expensive wrongful termination lawsuit. They knew that this was something that that could be a potential for, and they decided to place their own egos over trying to diffuse the situation, trying to work to put in place some sort of transition. We've seen, after this happened, we saw the chairman of the Board of Selectmen use town council to craft overtly political statements criticizing other members of the Board of Selectmen, criticizing dozens of town meeting representatives and sort of the special people in this town. And that's egregious. We've seen him directly sort of direct town employees and just grossly overstep his authority as a member of the Board of Selectmen. So those actions, and then also not allowing public comment during, such an important decision for our town, that to me is just egregious. And also to deny myself information that we're forced to vote on. Just a couple weeks ago, Bob O'Regan and myself, the board was forced to vote on a new contract for yet another interim town manager, Steve Anastos. We didn't even have an opportunity to review the contract. So right there, 2/5 of the town's elected officials on the select board, we were forced to enter into a contract that we haven't even read. And you know what? There are some ambiguities in that contract, and there's some potential liability, there for this town, and that's concerning, and it should be concerning to the taxpayers.
Now, all 5 of you received the contract at the same time, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So were you saying that perhaps most of the board had not seen it before voting?
Well, I can't. I don't want to make accusations. I don't know if the other people on the board, if they had an opportunity to review it or not. But I know that Bob O'Regan and we didn't. We had a meeting at 6 o'clock. We were sent the contract just right before the meeting, and then we're expected to vote on it. We're dishing out a $170,000 salary for an interim town manager. I have to this day never received qualifications, a resume. I just got the opportunity to meet Mr. Anastos recently for the first time last week at a Board of Selectmen meeting. So that to me that's egregious. For 2/5 of the town's elected Board of Selectmen to not be able to to even question the contract that this town was forced to enter into, that was egregious for me.
Now, is there a point, or are we past a point of no return where maybe compromises can be made, deals can be made that a recall could be avoided and that you can bridge a path forward without having to recall?
Sure. Well, it's obviously important for cooler heads to prevail regardless. I don't know if we're beyond that point or not. That's sort of up to the organizers of the recall to and the people that are affixing their signatures to this effort.
As a member of the board, what would you like to see, whether it's a laundry list or just one or two items of, if A, B, and C happened, then we could go forward. Because again, there is an election coming up in April. One of the members you're seeking a recall is up in that election. Again, you could theoretically flip the board in April and doing it through more conventional matters. So again, I'm just asking, is there a way to do this without having to go recall?
So, Jeff, if I may, what you're asking is, why can't we wait 8 months?
Sure.
Why can't we wait 2 years? Why can't we wait 3 years for those terms to be up? And I'll tell you that one of the biggest concerns for those that are supporting the recall is that we currently have 2 multi-million-dollar projects underway, 2 construction projects, the new high school and the new library. The actions of the 3 members of the Board of Selection have opened the town up to a potential lawsuit, and that has impacted the town's presence with these construction companies that are working on these projects. It could potentially impact the bond rating and cost the town a lot of money in the long term and delay these projects. The new high school is slated to be completed in less than 2 years, less than the time of the 3-year term. Same with the library. So we've seen the actions of the board over the last 4 months, and I don't think it's prudent to wait another 8 months to see what other damage can be wrought upon the town. So I think financially and based on their actions and the way they've responded to the public in the meetings at the end of June and the 2 meetings in July, we just simply can't wait 8 months for the seat to be up, or 2 years, or 3 years for that matter.
Yeah, I'd second what Christina said here. I didn't rush into a recall myself. Contrary to some of the remarks that have been made, there's no vast ongoing conspiracy or anything of that nature. I had to think long and hard about it, because a recall to me, it's like an impeachment. It represents a breakdown of the system. It's not a happy thing. I work in a lot of political campaigns. Generally, I really enjoy them. They're exciting. You're advancing a candidate, an agenda. When it comes to a recall, nobody's happy, and nobody should be happy. It's not something to celebrate. It's not something to get excited about. And as you said, the process really should take precedence. If it was an election in April, if there's going to be another election in April, I think all of us respect the will of the voters. However, when we are, like Christine said, when we are actually being put on notice by some of our contractors, when they've actually expressed their concerns in writing, that should open up a lot of eyes, no matter what our feelings about the personalities involved, no matter what our own political positions in town. That's a very frightening thing when we're engaged on projects on the scale that we are. And we don't want them jeopardized. We don't want to have problems with contractors themselves. And as Christine indicated as well, we don't want to get into tussles with lenders, with bond raters, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot at risk, and there's an awful lot to lose between now and April. That's the key thing. Otherwise, I'd be totally down with waiting till April. The electoral process is really the best way to address this. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But with so much at stake right now, next week, the week after, next month, I think that's the reason for what some might call, a rush. It's not a rush. It's been very well considered by those of us engaged in it. And for some of us, it wasn't a pleasant decision. I really didn't want to come to this conclusion myself. I thought long and hard about it. I was not drafted by 5-star generals to be a foot soldier in their campaign or any of that nonsense. But I came to the conclusion the hard way, and I would stick by it. And unfortunately, because of the current composition and because of what's transpired since April, I don't really see another alternate route. I see things. I see a pattern of behavior having been established, and I don't see any indication that that's going to change.
Now, by the charter, Selectman Sousa could not have been recalled this is about, I believe, maybe 25 days or so after he would have been eligible for recall. You're not allowed to recall somebody after 3 months from their election. You have to wait at least 3 months, according to the charter. So this is just past that point where he's eligible to even be recalled. So this definitely wasn't something that let's just wait to see what they can do and pounce while as soon as we can?
No. I'm going to echo what Michael said. I'm a member of a few committees in this town, the Finance Committee, and by way of that appointment, I'm on the new high school building committee, and I've served on the Glen Echo Committee since 2013. And I will say that, I was not drafted, I was not sought out. I took a long, hard look at what was going on, and I said to myself, do I trust that these 3 members of the board are going to be making decisions that are in the best interest of the town for the remainder of their term? Do I trust that the decisions they're going to make, whether it be for the appointment of an interim town manager, a new town manager, are they going to uphold the charter in the best interests of every resident of the town? And it was a long, hard decision to make, and ultimately, the acts that they committed over the past 2 months, 3 months, led me to decide to support the recall. You want to have a board in there that's going to be doing its homework, that's going to be putting the work in, to be transparent, to listen to the public, to follow the policies that are established, to uphold the charter. And I truly do not believe that those 3 members are going to do that or are willing to do that moving forward.
Looking at the petition for the recall and the reasons and grounds for the recall, many of the accusations here have been, I guess, other boards in town have also done this. The town manager wasn't evaluated for many years and under many different boards. There have been issues on other boards with public comment, including the Board of Selectmen 4 or 5 years ago and the school committee a few years ago. So what is different about this situation? There have been state laws that have been, open meeting violations, multiple open meeting violations by some boards. So what is different about these accusations when other boards, you might be looking at this and say, well, wait a minute, other boards do this too, why now?
In terms of the performance reviews, that hasn't happened for the past couple of years, and the biggest reason why it hasn't happened is because in Mike's past contract, he had certain raises that would kick in based on performance reviews. And that's a big contention with his lawsuit against the town, is he was denied these performance reviews that are in his contract. He was denied these raises that were in his contract. And so now you have to look at what that's going to do for the long-term position of his pension, or what sort of lost wages he might have been on the hook for. And we keep hearing over and over again that, who cares if we get sued? The town has insurance. That's not necessarily the case. Our insurance carrier, they've made it known to us that they only cover us for certain things. And, if we reach a limit on lost wages, the town's going to be on the hook for that. If we have to settle out of court, there's a potential that the town's going to be on the hook for that. A lot of people, they look at a decision that the judge just made last week or 2 weeks ago on the preliminary injunction, and they say, oh, well, this judge says everything that they did was perfectly legal. That's not the case. He only provided a ruling on the injunction portion of his lawsuit, and in his own words, he made it perfectly clear that he believes Mike Hartman can be made whole in all of this process through money, whether that's a settlement or through his lawsuit. So the legality of all this, it's certainly not shut and closed. The town still has a very active, very alive lawsuit against this town from Mike Hartman that could cost the town, quite a bit of liability over the next year or so.
Oh, what's the end game here with the recall? What are you looking for at the end of the day? If successful, you collect the signatures, it goes through, you're able to recall the 3 selectmen. What do you hope to see at the end of the day?
I want people to know perfectly clear, for me personally, this end game for me, it's not about restoring Mike Hartman as the town manager. Unless a judge orders that he's still the town manager, in my opinion, that's the only way to sort of get him back in his office. Recently we had the chairman on your interview say that, we want to put him back and we want to give him a $200,000 salary. That's false. Unless a judge orders that he's still the town manager, I have no intent. For me, the town needs to move on from Mike Hartman, and we need to put together a search committee that represents all the different groups in this town that can sort of be independent of the political process and hopefully find a suitable candidate. I'm concerned that, you know, people are going to look at this situation and they're going to, who's going to want to come and work for our town? And I'm already concerned about some of the, the department heads that we have now. They're already, worried about their jobs. I feel like the actions of these three members of the board, they've created a little bit of instability at Town Hall, and I'm worried about that.
If Mr. Anastos, though, was able to smooth things over in the next few months and things became a little less chaotic, does that hurt your chances, though? Just looking at things from a political standpoint, when people have to go to the ballot, because when you turn in your signatures by August 21st, there's still a process of roughly 2 months where their candidates will have to declare and collect signatures and turn the signatures in. And so we're looking at a fall election date sometime. Could be as late as October or November. So
if Steve does a nice job as town manager, if he's able to do everything that sort of that he should to really succeed at his job, then at the end of the day, we're all winners in this, the entire town, regardless of where your politics lie. I just actually had a meeting with him just this morning, and I made it, perfectly clear that, I'm gonna do whatever I can in my personal interests to help him succeed as town manager, because he was put in as town manager by those three gentlemen. I didn't receive any of his qualifications or anything, that led me to that vote to put him into office, but that's where he is now. And it's going to be up to all of us to make sure that, he succeeds in his position right now, because frankly, the stakes are pretty high. We all need to do a good job just making sure that he succeeds.
Yeah, Mike's absolutely right, and I want to reiterate, from a personal standpoint, and I think my views reflect that of many of the people involved in this, is that this is not a referendum on either Michael Hartman or Steve Anastos. I barely know either one of these gentlemen. I've heard great things about them, and I've heard some not so great things about them. I'm in no position to judge or evaluate their performance or their qualifications. That's really at the heart of it, however, though. Neither is anybody else. We haven't had performance reviews for Michael Hartman, and as Mike said, we haven't had a thorough review of Mr. Anastos' qualifications. And to be honest, and again, this has nothing to do with Mr. Anastos. I wish him well as well, and if he's capable of waving a magic wand and smoothing the waters, 64 days following the turning into the petitions, and we do have an election, well, 64 plus, when we do have an election, we'll see what happens at that point. But without that information, I'm in no position, and neither was Mike, and neither are other people. And to be honest, the idea of hiring somebody, no matter how interim, even if it's for a weekend, at a salary level like that, without a thorough review, is not something that any business I've ever been involved in would even consider. These processes tend to take weeks, months, etc. There is apparent, from what I read in the Enterprise yesterday, the chair has said that he does plan to start a search committee, etc. My question was, knowing that they had planned to not renew Mr. Hartman's contract in December, why was a search committee put in place at that time? Give yourself a few months. Give yourself the luxury of reviewing resumes, of conducting interviews, of doing background checks, the whole standard procedure that all of us would go through if we were applying for a minimum wage job. Instead, they waited until the very last moment, hired an interim, apparently illegally because it contravened Massachusetts state law, and then rushed into another interim appointment. That's not the way you do business. We're not a mom and pop shop. We're a multi-million dollar, very complex enterprise we're running here in town. Again, Mr. Anastos may be perfectly capable of taking the helm, of steering the ship into less troubled waters, but we don't know that. And that to me is particularly frightening.
It's important that you brought that up too, because that just shows another, sort of short-sighted decision that these three have made. When they appointed the interim town manager, they appointed Bill Rowe, the town accountant. So essentially, we had the person in charge of our internal auditing for the town. They were also now the chief procurement officer in violation of state statute that just shows what a conflict that is. So those guys jeopardized this town's ability for a couple of weeks to enter into legal contracts, to meet payroll, to pay our bills. You know, like Christine stated earlier, we received a letter the other day from Consigli, our general contractor on our high school construction project. They're worried about getting paid for the work that they're performing right now. You know, it's that type of instability that these three have created in this town because of their actions.
Oh, let's talk about, because there are people, social media has just been a buzz the last, almost to a point where it's nauseous looking at it over this issue. But there seems to be a narrative of there's, you know, you're mocked as special people. You know, there's a shadow government. So I wanted you to address that, where, you know, the group that's organizing this. But I also have to say, just observing, having a meeting that's not announced in literally the basement of a building in the shadows, and having a private Facebook group, doesn't that play into the hands a little bit of people who are saying, look, this is just a special group of people here?
You know, I'm personally appalled at the use of this sort of special people term. You know, he makes mention that the special people have taken over town meeting, the school committee, planning board, what have you. These are literally the couple hundred volunteers that have dedicated hours of their time to make sure that good things are happening in this community. So to say that there's special people trying to take over the town and destroy the town, these are the people giving up their time to make the town better. Now, there was a recall meeting last week in the basement of Town Spa. The biggest reason why it wasn't made public is because a lot of the people that are supporting this, they fear retaliation from these three members of the Board of Selectmen. There are town employees that are fearful of their jobs right now. They're fearful of retaliation because of these three members of the board. So you, I don't know, you tell me, what's more concerning? The fact that, you know, the chairman of our Board of Selectmen is out there calling these people special people, you know, or the fact that there's a few hundred citizens that are so concerned about the direction that this town government is taking that they're willing to meet and try to chart a new path forward.
We have a few seconds left before the clock expires, so just a very brief final thought, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, just to address your previous point about past wrongdoings in the town and how those did not incite a recall, I don't think that should serve as any precedent for why we should turn a blind eye to the current wrongdoings of the board. I think this recall is very founded in truth and fact and the way people are actually feeling and supporting the recall. So I think that it stands to show, you know, and reflects the views of the residents of this town, and I hope that we can be successful moving forward.
All right, well, I just want, not to cut you off, but our clock has expired, so I just want to sign off and thank everybody for tuning in. I'm Jeffrey Pickett. I want to thank Michael Horan and Christine Howe and Michael Sullivan for joining me, and we will see you next time on Stoughton Spotlight.